Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome. It's Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Ari Heart. I'm Jeremy Lesniak. Thanks for being here. Remember, if you want to go deeper on this or any other episode, it's whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. That's the place where we get to put all of the show notes because your podcast player, YouTube, they don't let us put up everything. So if you want the full Megillah, there we go.
Did you make that word up? Was that a real word?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can head on over there and you can check it out. We got the transcript over there and everything else. So please check out the things that we're doing to connect, educate, and entertain the traditional martial artists of the world.
Is that Yiddish, Megillah?
Hebrew. Megillah is the Purim story, right? See, I gotta be careful throwing out. You know, it's funny. Like for Hanukkah, it takes very little to get the prayers back into my brain. Like the first one's there, but on the first night there are three, and so it's like, okay.
I'm no help. I did take an intro to Judaism class here at Keene State, though.
Yeah,
but I didn't memorize any Hebrew, unfortunately.
Your name might suggest.
Right, I know. I've heard that before. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, we could turn this into some kind of interesting survey of religion, but I don't think the audience would appreciate that. That's not why they're here. Well, that stuff threads through once in a while. We're here to talk martial arts. So, I want to acknowledge, I want to make sure we get this first. You were very generous in the use of your space as part of Martial Summit. We did some stuff in there, which was awesome. And here we are, we're in Keene again today. Great town. Can I call it a town? Do I have to call it a city?
It's technically a city.
Okay, a great little city. Well, I live in Montpelier, which is a much smaller city. We have 8,000 people. But
really?
It is a city, yeah. Smallest state capital in the country.
Wow.
But let's talk about you and martial arts, because you operate a school called Elements MMA, and that right there, I mean, probably just had some spit takes out there because MMA is not. I've been labeled as anti-MMA. I'm not, but I have been. I have been as such because there seems to be this interesting divide between traditional and what I would actually rather call modern martial arts rather than mixed martial arts. But how did you, we're going to get into that. I'm sure we'll get into all that. How did you get started? Let's start there.
Well, I think it was karate when I was like 6. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time where every picture of me, I'm like reared up with like I have one leg up, like caged for like a roundhouse kick.
I love it.
I think I got to like white with a yellow stripe or something like that. I remember doing like one sparring session. Yeah, it had to be like 6. Like one like tournament with like a belt ceremony, and I remember being like, yeah, like I kicked butt, but it was it was like point sparring, and it was very, very low contact kind of stuff. And then that school disappeared because I lived in small town New Hampshire, and and then I didn't really have anything until I was an adult, and then the UFC came out, and it was like, this was back when the UFC was kind of like pornography. It was like, oh my God, did you see this thing on TV?
You had to go to Blockbuster and rent the VHS.
You had to have like a trench coat on. And like, yeah.
It was on the high shelf.
Yeah, but that was when it was like really fun for me because you got to see traditional martial arts of all kinds. You got to see newer martial arts like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You get to see weird stuff like a guy going out there with one boxing glove and one free hand. It was so cool. Mm-hmm. It was like blood sport. Yeah. It was like watching like Bloodsport with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And it really piqued my interest. I had actually had a really traumatic experience where I had 2 people break into my house and rob me with bats. And I felt totally powerless. And that was when I was like 18. It was right after my mom had passed away. And I had like very little direction. And then I saw the UFC and it really brought up like 2 sides of me. One, like this pain side that was like taken advantage of. Yeah. And also it brought up this side of me that was like, I could do that. I could stick up for myself. I could be strong at a point in my life where I was very not strong. I was a cook at the time. I'd gone to school for cooking, and it turned out that the restaurant that I was working at, when I started seeing this UFC stuff, the kitchen manager revealed to all of us one day, he was like, "Oh, I was actually a Taekwondo international, like he was like an Olympic champion in Taekwondo, Sean Moot." And he also was like one of the first people trained by Billy Blanks, who was also a big Taekwondo person, in Taibo. So he had this career in martial arts, and it was really cool. And anyways, he started offering Taekwondo lessons in his garage. And it was brutal. It was like everything you expect about Taekwondo, like, like running up rocky hills with no shoes on, and like if you farted in class, you got kicked 3 times in the solar. It was like that kind of like really hard-nosed stuff.
Yeah.
I did that for a year. I ended up transferring down to Keene. I was living in West Lebanon at the time. Transferred down to Keene, and I, again, through working in a restaurant, met someone who's like, "Oh, hey, we have this, like, you're into UFC, right? You're into MMA. We have this fight club in my friend's barn." And it was, I don't know if you remember Matt Derling and Contenders. It was the first mixed martial arts gym here in town.
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he so it was just like, it was something he had continued from this guy Paul, who owned Martial Arts Principles, which was a martial arts studio in Keene that fizzled out. And so Matt kept that going. And again, it was super hard-nosed. There's a bunch of guys just beating the tar out of each other with very little technique, like watching YouTube videos. And then we were like, we want to get more serious about this. We started sampling local dojos. We went to every dojo in town, and I'm smiling because I remember going over to Shaolin Studios and like, this is a kung fu studio, and asking them like, "Hey, like we're really interested in UFC. Like the ground game is really big right now. Like, what would you do if what would you show us to do as a technique if someone fell on the ground, or we were defending ourselves on the ground?" It's like, "Well, you just kick them. You just keep kicking them." And I was like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So we went on this quest to like find some real martial artists in the area. We ended up finding Dan Caulfield, who opened a place in town called Flow BJJ. They were open. We were like part of the ground up for that. Matt decided to focus more on boxing. He started turning out Golden Gloves champs. That was really cool. I started to pull away from striking a little bit, mainly because it was non-traditional. It was like doing Muay Thai and doing boxing. It's like you're getting hit constantly. And I just like, I didn't like that feeling in my body of being consistently concussed. And I started to really get into jiu-jitsu, and I just kind of threw myself at it. And I still did boxing once in a while. I would still like spar with people once in a while, but like jiu-jitsu was my thing. And I got really interested in jiu-jitsu, and I started competing a lot. Our instructor, Dan, was only a purple belt when he started the school, and he was slowly leveling up as we were there. So it took us like a really long time to get belts, because at first he didn't want to give anybody a belt because he didn't feel like he could. So it was like a lot of training. It was a lot of training and not getting that, not feeling that progression. Like I was like a 3-year white belt in jiu-jitsu. But did a lot of tournaments, had a lot of success. And then I did some traveling, and I did jiu-jitsu all over the country. One of the places I loved the most when I was traveling was Nashville MMA. I spent a year there. They were awesome. They have their black belt was a Lloyd Irving black belt, and he was just amazing. He was a former pro football player. And his name was Sean Hammonds. He was just an awesome guy. And then I came back to Keene and decided to go to college. I wanted to like figure out like a job that was more in the health and fitness arena, because like cooking wasn't lending itself to my martial arts training. It was like you were a cook and nothing else. And it didn't groove with what I wanted to do.
It doesn't tend to be an environment that's, ironically, food, right? You would think people involved in food would care about health, but I worked in a kitchen, and it was some of the least healthy people and some of the most drug-addled people I've ever been around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a problem for me. It was like when my mom passed, and as like a younger person, like I got into drugs, I got into smoking cigarettes and stuff like that, and the restaurant was like, it was like I couldn't get away from those things. I knew I wanted to change, and I couldn't.
Yeah. The only break you get working in a kitchen is a cigarette break.
Exactly.
I have to go have a cigarette. People okay that.
Yeah,
I need to go decompress for 5 minutes. I used to do that. I've never been a smoker, and I'd say, "You're all taking smoke breaks. I'm going to go take an outside, see the sunlight break because I'm working a double today."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I knew I had to get out of that. So I came back to the area and got accepted to Keene State in the exercise science program, and I took over teaching the Keene State Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club. And I was just a blue belt when I started, but that was more experience than most people had.
Sure.
I got promoted to purple while I was teaching there, while I was attending Keene State. Mm-hmm. That was a huge shift for me. Being someone who for a long time felt like really shy, really like socially awkward and stuff like that, and then having to teach people how to move their bodies, mm-hmm. having to just interact with people and interact with my voice so much more. It really brought me a lot of like confidence, and it also helped me to figure out like what I wanted to do with my life a little bit more. So that took me in the direction of like, I want to own my own studio one day. Mm. And that got me into yoga, jiu-jitsu, injuring myself all the time, turned me towards yoga. That became like a spiritual path for me. And then lots of life stuff happened in between there. I was a yoga therapist for 3 years, mainly just doing individualized yoga sessions mm-hmm. with people. And that was wonderful. And then COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And when COVID hit, it was like, well, there's nothing to do. The gym I was training at in Nashua was doing pods. So it was like I was training constantly.
What do you mean by pods?
Like groups of people would agree to only train with each other, and they tried to train within like family groups as much as possible, or friend groups, so that there wasn't as much interaction.
Risking the cross contamination. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. So during that time, I wrote my book, and I got my brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and I just started dreaming of like when this COVID thing's over, like what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I know that Keene needs a well-run mixed martial arts school. Because at the time, Contenders was still being run, but it was no longer run by Matt. It was his uncle Mark who was running it, and he wasn't a real fighter. He wasn't really. It was just like not run well. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I know that there's this hole in Keene where people want mixed martial arts, and I'm not necessarily a mixed martial artist. I dabbled, but I have like a really concentrated focus on sure. jiu-jitsu, and but I knew that. The UFC and mixed martial arts was kind of big, and that people appreciated the idea of bringing many different martial arts together to create pedigrees. So I just decided to go with it, and we just had huge success when we first opened. It was like people were really hungry for something like this. And it's been a total whirlwind, and we're constantly reinventing ourselves, and yeah, it's been a really awesome journey being a teacher to so many people in so many different ways over at Elements and at Keene State. And it's just totally transformed my life.
Nice. I want to talk more about, you used a word reinvention. We'll go there in a moment. But I want to go back because I don't think I've ever met anyone who has gone, is it fair to say, all in on BJJ? But the other physical thing they do is yoga, and that they went kind of all in on yoga. So can you talk about that and where you see the synergy between the two?
Yeah, definitely. Well, when you mention like there's these differing schools of like these sport martial arts, like MMA style martial arts, like jiu-jitsu gets sucked into MMA because of what happened with the Gracies and the UFC. Right. And it's also a modern martial art. It's not an old martial art. It has its seeds in judo, but it's fairly young.
The other traditional martial arts that people pretend are much, much older are not nearly as old as they like to think they are.
Right, yeah.
BJJ is not as young comparatively as some folks want to make it out.
Same thing with physical yoga. People are like, yes. This sun salutation has been being performed for 2,000. No, Not true. It's like maybe 150 years old. Yeah.
Sorry.
There's a great book called The Story of Yoga that debunks all this stuff. But
is that the book? There's a book, and I caught this weird NPR piece once. I was driving to New York for some martial arts stuff, and there was this piece on, and here's the summary. Yoga was invented as a way for Indian men to date and sleep with Western women. That the 30-minute piece, that's what it summarized down to. I was like, holy cow.
Wow, that wasn't the book that I read.
Okay.
I will say that there's a lot to be, I could see that makes a lot of sense for when yoga was brought to the West.
Okay.
But it was definitely a thing in India before. Like, it wasn't, I couldn't agree that it was invented just to date Western women, but I don't know.
That makes me feel
there's better historians out there than me, obviously.
Sure.
But anyways, what happened for me with yoga was like most martial artists. Oh, I remember the thread that I was on. Let me go back.
Okay.
So traditional martial arts has this focus on conditioning through things like deep stretching. No, it was like a thing, like in Taekwondo and in karate, most karate forms, like you needed a split, or you couldn't do half of the stuff that you were supposed to do. And that focus on flexibility really lent itself to hardiness. It was like durability of the body. Yeah. Like stretching and strength training was a big part of it. And now with modern martial arts, at least when, like, specifically with Jiu-Jitsu, that teacher that I had, Dan Caulfield, he would say things like, I would say, like, what should I do? What kind of workouts, what kind of stretches should I do to get better at Jiu-Jitsu? He's like, oh, the only thing you need to do to get better at Jiu-Jitsu is more Jiu-Jitsu. And that didn't land with me because I kept getting hurt. And maybe his body, he had done a bunch of other martial arts. Like, he did Thai push hands, and he had like a full split. His body was very limber. And I was super tight, hadn't done anything for many years because I had stuck myself to a chair as a kid and, played video games.
A lot of shoulder stuff for you?
Yeah, I have shoulder injuries now, yep. But I had 4 knee surgeries because of jiu-jitsu. And I found out after doing a ton of yoga, like fast forward for a second, that was because of really, really tight hips, the knee joint taking all the torque that the hip joint was supposed to take. And no one ever taught me how to stretch, how to mobilize, how to even do proper strength training. Mm-hmm. So at Keene State, I started learning about proper strength training. I was like, whoa, this is way different than what I've been doing. I've been trashing my body. This is so cool. And we would do like yoga-esque things. We would do like athletic mobilization practices, like dynamic warm-ups and stuff. And there was like science, and it's like, this is how you should prepare yourself for exercise. It's like, duh, this is why I've been getting injured all this time. We just go in, we jog a couple laps, we do karaokes, we do somersaults, and that's it. And it's like, that's not mobilizing. Your body's warm, but you didn't do anything for your joints necessarily. So I got really fed up with getting hurt all the time. And I started stretching a little bit here or there. I was noticing benefits. And then actually I got into something. This is like a strange aside. I got into acro yoga, which is like another partner activity. It's like you're playing airplane.
Super fun stuff.
Yeah, it's really fun. But my now partner, at the time, she was an acro yoga teacher and a yoga teacher, and she saw me and someone else doing acro, and she's like, oh, you're really strong, you'd be really good at this, but you are like super tight, you are like really inflexible, and you'd be way better if you were flexible, because a lot of the functionality of the body is missing when you're too tight. Like, if you can't straighten your arms out all the way, you can't stack properly for like acrobatic movements and stuff. So she was like, you should become a yoga teacher. You already teach jiu-jitsu. Like, why not like do a yoga teacher training? And I was like, and originally I was like, oh yeah, this will be a great move for my studio one day. I'll teach yoga and I'll teach jiu-jitsu, and it'll all go together. And then I went and did a yoga teacher training, and I had like a spiritual experience that I was not expecting to have. Like, I was there for my career, and then I was like, it really opened my heart up, and it really opened me up to my spirit. And that was something that I really needed, because I lost my mom, I lost my dad, I lost my grandfather, like all like boom, 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 right in a row, and didn't really connect with the ways I was raised to deal with like grief and like the spirituality practices I was offered were not, they're almost non-existent. And they, like after my mom died, it was like, yeah, we had a funeral and then nobody talked about it, so there was nothing to do with that pain. And yoga,
so you stuffed it down.
Oh,
and you went at things intensely, whether it was jiu-jitsu or yoga or probably school or whatever, just head down, plow forward.
You hit the nail on the head. I bottled it up. I stuffed it down. And of course, then it just turns into bile. You stuff it down, it doesn't disappear. It just turns into like acid in your body. And yoga was like, I mean, at least for me, this is what happened for me with the physical practice. It asks me to be like introspective, to notice myself instead of that forcing something away. It's like, you got to look at yourself and be like, oh, my body hurts. And I've been treating my body like crap. And I do the same thing to my mind. And so that's what happened for me with yoga. And then as I started practicing more and more, I was like, oh, I don't get injured like at all anymore. And I loved the feeling, like I liked sharing jiu-jitsu with people at the Keene State Jiu-Jitsu Club. I started teaching yoga here, and I loved the feeling of people coming up and like, oh man, I feel so much better. Thank you. Like I feel relaxed, or that back problem feels better. And it's like, like you did it. I would say to them, like, you did the work. I just like told you to breathe and stretch. And so it was a really cool yin to the yang of jiu-jitsu, where like I could teach people like, yeah, I can teach you to throw each other around and choke each other and armbar each other, but I can also teach you to take care of yourself. And they mesh so well for me that now as a 36-year-old who still wants to like train to get his black belt and has to like fight a bunch of really tough young people who just want to go hard, I don't know how I did it before without stretching, without mobilizing, without proper athletic care of the body. So I think that they go together so well. And usually when I teach people who are like jiu-jitsu athletes or martial artists, yoga, I just remove the spirituality component, because it's like, you don't necessarily need that to get the physical benefits. And if someone needs it and is open to it, that spiritual stuff will just happen, like it happened to me. The yoga teacher training I did was not very spiritually focused. It's just like, it makes you look at yourself very closely, and it's like, that's going to open you up to something.
Yeah. How did that awakening change the way you not taught, but played your jiu-jitsu? Because, and here, so for folks, I've done just enough BJJ to have a basic understanding. More of my understanding of BJJ has come from talking with people, right? How you play is often a reflection of who you are, right? So I could imagine prior, you're out there and someone's trying to smash you, you're trying to smash them back. It's, there's probably a lot of strength in there. But I guess on the other side, it was a little bit different.
You just made me think of like back when I was training, when I was a white belt, and there are these pictures of me and training, and I'm like in a movement, and I'm like so rigid, and you can see like I'm very muscular, and I've been like lifting, and I've been doing a lot of jiu-jitsu, so, and I'm taking creatine, eating a lot of food, and I've got like weird bulging stuff going on, and I look like a block of rigid, useless muscle, and my face is like, I'm like, it's just like all tension. Yeah. And of course you need moments of that, but it was like every picture of me was like that, and I feel like now if you took like 100 pictures of me in a rolling session, half of them would be me smiling and laughing and like, or half of them would be me like with a look on my face, like I'm reading a book, like I'm like really chilled out. And I think that's a big part of why I was getting injured. It wasn't just that I wasn't stretching, I wasn't mobilizing. It was just that I was the rock and not the water.
Force on force.
Yeah.
Do you ever roll with your eyes closed?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, sometimes when you're rolling, even if you have your eyes open, it's like the eyes aren't really doing anything. When you're so close contact with someone
Yeah,
on
if
the
somebody's
ground,
body's here, it doesn't.
right? Yeah, a lot of it is felt
Gotta
sense.
feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. All right. Similar question. How did that awakening change the way you taught jiu-jitsu?
Mm. Well, I know that my yoga teaching it has influenced my jujitsu teaching, but I definitely feel like I have like two versions of myself. Like I have like the jujitsu coach and I have like the yoga teacher. Um, as a yoga therapist, like I learned a lot about trauma sensitivity and stuff like
Mm.
that. So I think that more affected the way I teach people than like my spiritual awakening, because I've always kept a pretty strong delineation between um, my teaching of jujitsu and that spiritual side, because I don't want to turn people off, I guess. Maybe that's like a hang up, like an insecurity. Maybe I should work on that. But I definitely like, yeah, when I like, for instance, I teach yoga after the martial arts classes up at this place I train at in Nashua, and the edgiest part of the whole stretching session is the last moment where I'm like, all right, take 3 deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. And I can feel everybody like a little bit like the stretching thing, like I can just barely get on board with that. But when you tell me to breathe, man, this is getting too woo woo for me, you know? So I
Which is so ironic, right?
it is. It
Because we
really
all
is.
breathe.
Especially in martial arts. What's
Or
the
you
ki
die very
about?
quickly. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I have to think more about your question, but my initial reaction is I don't think I blend it that much.
Hmm.
Other than sometimes I yeah, I wanted to, when we opened Elements, to make it more like traditional martial arts, where there's like a bunch of stretching beforehand, and there's some like focus and stuff like that. And the only reason why I got away from that is because it felt like the classes weren't long enough. Like the time chunks weren't long enough. Like 20 minutes of stretching, then it's how much technique and sparring can you actually get into in an hour class? So yeah, I guess it hasn't informed it as much as I would like it to.
Hmm. But it sounds like you're asking yourself these questions. How can it?
Yeah.
Right, and that's interesting. And one of the I've been in enough martial arts schools over the years that I can get a sense. You can tell, and those of you out there who've been in a bunch of martial arts schools, you know what I'm talking about. That you can tell from the way things are laid out, or what's on the wall, or the signage. You can tell a lot about a school and the philosophy of the school. And I knew as soon as I saw the space, I was like, yeah, this is a different sort of MMA gym, right? When I did BJJ, I stopped doing BJJ because everybody wanted to smash all the time, and I'm like, I was in my late 20s at the time. I'm still in my 40s, quite resilient physically, but I was young enough to do it, but old enough to not want to, right? And we would have stand up night, and I'd get them back for what they did the other night. They're throwing me around. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to kick you in the face 6 times. And it was all in good fun. It was a good group, and I think very highly of them, and they've turned out some wonderful athletes. But you could tell when you walked in that it was just there was an energy to it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's the contribution of the yoga energy or whatever it is, but you have a different sort of space, and I wonder if you've heard that from other people. You're not nodding your head like, wow, this is the first time I've heard that.
Yeah, we definitely have gotten that before. Actually, I was just speaking to a former member, and he was like, "Oh yeah, me and my son, we loved your program, and then when we dropped out, we took a moment and went to another studio." And he said he was like, I couldn't stay there because I felt like everyone was trying to kill me, and that was kind of the feel that I got from contenders, and that was the way that I was like raised on martial arts, and which I mean, like as I started as an adult, like getting into MMA. That Taekwondo story I told you, like it was all very brutish and hard nosed,
ego forward, very egocentric.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, exactly, and that's what I wanted to be different when we started the studio. So I guess better answering your question of how it's informed the way I teach jiu-jitsu, it's more like the way that the space is presented and the way that I encourage people to spar. Because when I'm teaching people the technique, I feel like I'm very like to the point, and I'm not, I'm not the yoga part of me isn't necessarily coming out. But when we get ready to spar, I am always trying to encourage people to take it down a notch. And actually, that is really a tenet of real jiu-jitsu. They in Brazil they would call it arte suave, like the gentle art. And that's also has been the tenet of judo, which was the grandmother of jiu-jitsu. And I think that that's gotten lost a lot as jiu-jitsu has become, one, a sport, and two, associated with mixed martial arts. So when you go to a lot of jiu-jitsu studios, it's like people might have aspirations about being a great fighter or something like that. And I think what makes jiu-jitsu studios and martial arts studios the most useful to our society is the brotherly or sisterly love that you can get from martial arts studios. And that's what we want to offer at Elements. We want people to feel welcome. Mm-hmm. Like when we first were opening, we made sure it was a part of all of our like our blurbs on our website, our social media posts, our discounts. They all reflected that we wanted to attract a diverse group of people. We had discounted programs for women. We have concurrent discounts for correctional officers and police officers and EMS and any first responders. We did, anti-bullying seminars and stuff like that. We want to get people from all walks of life in.
It's community. You're building a community. That's the word that keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, and I've shared this story. It's a short story, briefly, but you've been watching the UFC for a while. You probably remember the name Carlos Newton. So I had the opportunity to roll with Carlos Newton at an event, and it was the most enjoyable grappling experience of my life because he wasn't trying to kill me. He closed his eyes and we moved. I had no illusions that I could touch this guy. He outweighed me. He outclassed me. He was a headliner at the event. So even if I could have come close, it would have been disrespectful, right? There's zero in my brain that I can do anything, but I'm going to participate. And I'm just going to, and he just kind of closes his eyes and I'm like, this is awesome. And I just got to experience what it was like to be with someone who knew so much about how the body moved that he knew where I was going before I went. Right. And I've got some of that standing up from my background, but to see it and to experience it that other way was great. And I came away, and because most of my experience prior to that had been getting smashed. Right now it's like, okay, so there are people who have my more general martial arts philosophy and apply it to BJJ, and that's what I'm hearing from you is that you're like, yeah, it's just another way of moving. It doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be ego.
Yeah. I just came from Brattleboro Conscious Dance, which is this thing that they do once or twice a month over at Inner Heat Yoga. And it was really funny. Like, I'm not a big dancer, but I've been getting into it more as an adult. And they have, it's kind of like move however you want. It's not like, the tango or something like that where everyone's doing the same steps. Like somebody's in the corner doing yoga. This person is like shaking their body vigorously. These people are dancing the tango maybe, but it's like everyone just does whatever they want. And I briefly started dancing with a couple people, and I realized that I was like doing these like flowing movements with them that was like, I was like, oh, this is all the jiu-jitsu training in my body. Like I don't know how to dance, but taking out all of the force and totally just trying to move with someone fluidly, I was like, oh, shoot, I know how to dance now? When did this happen? And I felt so I felt so fluid. I felt so connected to these people. It was like, that camaraderie, that community thing was there. And that's what I think is missing from martial arts is like, or it's missing from modern martial arts is that focus on using the littlest amount of energy possible to affect change in some way.
Right. So let's talk about that because you certainly exist at least partially, at least 1 foot in a world that often draws a thick line between modern or real, I'm using air quotes to the folks listening, arts like Muay Thai, BJJ, some people might put Krav Maga over there, and then maybe on the other side of the line are karate and kung fu and taekwondo, etc. And there's a lot of disrespect that's thrown in both directions, and I certainly have enough history. I've done enough episodes of the show that my views on the subject are quite plain and quite consistent. I see value in both things, and the place that I have issue, when and if I have issue, has to do with the way it's trained in terms of disrespect, ego, class training being inherently violent towards students, right? Things that I don't think are exclusive to one side of the line or the other. But what I think I'm hearing you say is maybe some of the more modern martial arts would benefit from some of the traditional elements in the way they're trained.
Yeah, lots of times when people reach out to us at the studio about like a kids program, they're like, what do you folks do for like discipline and like self-awareness and like and self-confidence and stuff like that? Because that's what, when we, like, a lot of people who haven't been who haven't tasted the UFC, who haven't become, sorry, I'm getting a little off track.
That's okay.
When people reach out to us about the kids program, they're reaching out because they want their kids to get what they have, the idea of what martial arts gives to people. And they get that from like karate movies, kung fu movies, stuff like that. Yeah. And it's like things like discipline and self-awareness and self-confidence and fluidity and focus. And I mean, I don't know, when you watch the UFC, especially nowadays, you probably don't get that. You get like a big testosterone circus. And people ask me a lot because they know I own an MMA studio. They're like, oh, did you watch the fights recently? And I have a hard time telling people, but I'm like, no, I don't really watch the UFC anymore because honestly, it has degraded to something that I don't really enjoy anymore. When I was talking to you in the beginning about my story of starting off as a martial artist as an adult, it was that those first couple UFCs where you had to see all the different martial arts, coming together, like who's the best and all that. But it was cool because there was all these different schools of thought, and at the end, everybody was like shaking hands and saying like, "Oh, you got to teach me that. You got to teach me that. Like that's so cool." And I'm sure that's still a part of MMA and the UFC. But when you turn on the TV now, because they've turned it into this big capitalistic thing, it's just all about like who's making the most, who's like instigating the most. Basically, it's like WWE wrestling.
It is not an accident that the same ownership now has WWE and the UFC.
Yeah, and it's just I can't watch that stuff anymore. Like all the posturing, all the ego, it makes it not enjoyable to watch. And you also add in the fact that now they're telling people how to fight to make it look more enjoyable, to make it look more spectacular. So they pay people more money to like not go to the ground and stuff like that, to like keep things standing up so that people get knocked out because it's boring when it goes to the ground and stuff like that. So it's just I don't really like that kind of stuff. But yes, I agree with you that modern martial arts could definitely benefit from a lot of aspects that have been lost from traditional martial arts. I mean, we talked about like stretching as an obvious one, like resilience training, like training people so that they can be martial arts their whole lives instead of just their 20s. Things like teamwork and respect. And these are all the the foundations of what we try to offer in our kids program. Mm-hmm. We have this 4-element system where it's like, instead of just giving kids a white stripe on their belt every time they figure out a new technique, we have a 4 stripe system of different colors, and they all mean something. Like, we have a respect stripe, we have a teamwork stripe, we have a self-control stripe. And so kids who are like really, really good at the techniques, they'll have a bunch of red stripes on their belt, but it's like, we can't promote you because you're not kind to your teammates, or you're not helpful when your instructor asks you to do something.
That's the word you use for fellow students, is teammates.
Teammates.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. Our green stripe is the teamwork stripe, because it's like, I notice with kids a lot, when they're drilling, for instance, or trying to have them drill, that they want to like win the drill. And I have to tell kids, be like, hey, we're not going to be able to give you your teamwork stripe if you're trying to trick your partner. You know what they're doing, and you're messing it up, so they can't learn. So the kids learn really quickly. Like, it's like, no, we're doing this with 0 resistance, so that our partner can learn. You might be bigger than them. You might feel like you're smarter than them, like you've got it figured out how you can defeat it already. But that's not how we do things here. And so it's. You also bring up a really good point. When I first opened Elements, I was definitely indoctrinated with this idea that, like, I didn't want to offer any traditional martial arts because I didn't think they were that applicable to things like self-defense, things like mixed martial arts, like if people want to compete in like more high contact stuff. And then I got this application from Abby Hoy, and I was
so Abby has not been on the show.
Damn it, Abby!
I've invited her. It's an open invite. It'll happen. But those of you who have been to whistlekick events, you may have met Abby if you've been to any of our events in the Northeast.
You're gonna have to drag her in here probably.
Yeah.
But so I'm gonna tell the story from the beginning to the end so that I don't give it away. But
sure.
I get this email from Abby, an instructor application, and I read the credentials, and I'm like, like black belt in karate, black belt in taekwondo, and I'm like, I want to offer Muay Thai, and I want to offer boxing, I want to offer Jiu-Jitsu, I want to offer these sports martial arts that have been proven in the UFC to be competition ready, that have been proven to be useful in self-defense. And I recognize now that's a very dwarfed view, and I'm just trying to tell. I'm trying to be honest.
You're telling the honest story.
I'm trying to be honest. Yeah. And then we share a phone call. I'm like, yeah, I could probably use some help with like the kids program, And then, anyways, we're a couple months into running Elements. I realize I'm totally over my head. I'm like, wow, like this is getting way busier than I thought. This is really, a lot of stuff.
Great problem to have, still a problem.
Yeah. And like the kids program, I was like, this is my first time teaching kids. I'm like, wow, this is wild. One day, Abby just comes in. This is post-COVID, so she's got a mask on. I'm like, who is this person? She's got a black belt on. She comes into the kids program. I've got a brown belt on because, of course, I only have a brown belt.
And by the way, Abby is smaller of stature, so with a mask on, you may have thought she was a tall child.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was confused. And then she just jumps in and she's like magic with the kids. I mean, she's also an educator, so that helps. But, and then over time, working with Abby, it was just like, whoa, this is the kind of person that I want at this. Like, this is like, if I could have an ideal teacher and an ideal, even like an ideal student, like say she came in and she became a student, like it would be Abby, because she's super respectful, super driven, and she's always there. She like made it another home. Like that's what I did when I got really into martial arts. That's the kind of people I need. And she makes people feel welcome. Yeah. And anyways, she totally changed my mind about the value of these traditional martial arts, because it was a part of her personality, all these other tenets. And then she started just destroying it in the jiu-jitsu classes. Again, 5 foot something tall, like 110 pounds. I don't know. She's like very small person. And I have guys coming up to me regularly who are a foot taller than her and, like solid guys. And I'm like, damn, like what are you feeding her? I'm like, it's called jiu-jitsu. She just like does it, you know, and I know that's because of her her mind space around martial arts. She treats jiu-jitsu like she's treated all of the other martial arts she's trained, and that's why those black belts are they're super valid to me now. And when I first read her credentials again, I was like, I don't know about this. Like I have mixed feelings about these martial arts, and then she totally changed my mind.
I take it back. I remembered Abby was on, and I'm going to do something I don't usually do. I'm going to grab my phone and I'm going to check something. I know she was on a group episode that we did because we pretty much had to.
You had to trick her into it.
We kind of had to trick her.
That makes sense.
And I want to get that episode so people can, because she was great on it. 781. It was titled Martial Arts Friendships, and we talked about the friendships that form within the martial arts, specifically because you're beating on people and they're beating on you. It creates a different caliber of relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Abby will watch or listen, and so I apologize for forgetting that you were on that, but almost 900 episodes. My brain isn't always great with that, and I still want you to come on the show, and maybe Ari will.
I'll try to convince her.
That. All right, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so as you had that shift in how you looked at traditional arts because of Abby, how did that also change perhaps you, your training, your teaching, your school?
Well, it brought a new light to me to the term mixed martial arts, because I think that acronym mixed martial arts, like, it gets associated with the UFC, and I think it's really important that we tease those apart now, because Abby was a true mixed martial artist. She's got a black belt in karate, she got a black belt in taekwondo, and she didn't stop there. She wasn't like, this is enough for me. She's like, no, I want to learn jiu-jitsu too. I want to, like, totally different, like a paradigm shift in martial arts from like striking to grappling, and now she's sinking her teeth into it.
And she has her black belt in superfoot kickboxing.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. So Elements is now, and my philosophy is now, like, more open to any martial art that brings people joy, that brings people happiness, focus, strength, confidence. I'm all about it. It's interesting because I've been saying to people for years, people are like, oh, I don't do yoga. And I'm like, well, you might be surprised, because to me, yoga is anything that, like, opens you up. And I've been telling, people, like, maybe you're a rock climber, that's your yoga. If you get into your Zen spot, you get into that place where, like, everything flows, like, that's your yoga. And I feel that way about martial arts now. I feel like there is validity in all martial arts. It makes me think of capoeira actually right now, because capoeira was like a way for like slaves and prisoners to empower themselves within the confines of like the rules were they couldn't touch each other, right, in these prison systems and these slave camps. And so they created a martial arts system where they could train kicks and punches and acrobatic movements with each other and connect with each other in a martial sense, underneath like an umbrella of oppression. And so I think that any martial arts form, it's the same thing with dancing and yoga and whatever your movement form is, like whatever brings people that joy, that's what we want to offer. And so right down the street at Elements, we're offering like dance classes and stuff. We offer yoga.
That's awesome.
After doing this conscious dancing in Brattleboro, like I want to get them to come over and do this over at Elements, because for me, that statement that I mentioned that a sensei once told me, like, the only thing you should do to get better at jiu-jitsu is to do more jiu-jitsu, that might have been true for him. But for me, the truth has been that the more I open myself up to new ideas and new versions of movement, whether it's going from thinking that jiu-jitsu is like the most powerful martial art and like it's what I want to teach everybody to, no, like if you connect with taekwondo, if that's your thing, that's what you should do. If it lights you up, do it. And I want to end this thread on, the other day I was doing my stretches after teaching jiu-jitsu, and Abby was hosting a taekwondo class, and she's like, "Oh, it's sparring day." She's like, "Hey, Ari, you want to hit people?" And I hadn't done striking sparring in years. Maybe since I first opened Elements, I sparred with the coach and a couple of people, like when we were first opening, the striking coach Shane. I sparred with him. I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun. And I had so much fun sparring with these taekwondo folks. One of them was Andrew. I guess he's not necessarily a taekwondo guy, but he had the Superfoot black belt, and I just had a blast. And it was like it. I'm now thinking about like that experience at this dance and the experience in taekwondo where I felt. I just felt so open to the diversity of the way that we move our body. You know, I was that day with Abby in her class. I was sparring with kids like half my size, and obviously very very gently.
Sure.
Sparring with big people like Andrew, sparring with grapplers. It was like wow, we have like this amazing mixed community, and we're all coming together, and everyone's having fun. And it was the same vibe that I just had at this conscious dance, where I'm like connecting with people and feeling my martial arts body moving with these people who are all like trained dancers and stuff, and feeling like we're speaking the same language, just different dialects.
And I love that metaphor. It's one that we've used on the show a number of times, this idea that physical movement can be communicated in a language, and we have different words for it, right? I started my martial arts career as a karate person, so even when I do taekwondo, I look like a karate person doing taekwondo. And I have taekwondo friends who I've taught karate. I have taekwondo people, in fact, roughly a third of my karate school is people who have trained taekwondo for a while. And they do karate like taekwondo people. Right. And you were dancing like a jiu-jitsu person, right? And so it's this idea that, there's this physical expression. The body can only move in so many different ways. And we get used to using them in a certain way, in a certain art. But, there's some value in going, okay, what is my... Now that you're having this realization, right? Now it can be an intentional question. What's it like if I dance like jiu-jitsu? Which is a weird question, right? Like, what does that question even mean? But in discovering the question, there's some really cool stuff that comes up, whatever the answers are. And, as we're talking, you've got my mind turning, and I hope the folks in the audience, it's turning some wheels for them too. Because, there's something I want to go back to. As you've talked through this, one of the things I'm hearing is you started a school originally that was self-defense and combat sport focused. But what I heard, not in these words, but what I heard was there's value in developing beyond that, and we can use these same tools to develop other things, right? I can roll in hopes that I compete. I can also roll to relieve stress. I can roll for health. I can roll for community. I can roll for love, right? Hopefully we don't get into fights. Hopefully the self-defense aspects of what we train are minimally used. But life is still going to kick the crap out of us on a day-to-day basis. Being able to mitigate that, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah. I have literally never been in a fight since starting training martial arts as an adult.
That's awesome.
And I used to get into a lot of them as a kid, and I really think that the training trains us out of the need. Well, most of us, there's definitely like outliers where people just want to hurt each other, and they train martial arts to get better at hurting each other. Mm-hmm. But I think the majority of people, they train themselves out of that energy. Mm-hmm. It's like I get all my angst out in the gym, and then I go home and it's been released, and I don't need to bring that into the rest of my life. That's been probably that has literally been the most important part of martial arts for me, is getting rid of the kind of static energy of angst, of pain that will turn into anger and will turn into like, like wanting to, whether it's wanting to like hurt other people or hurt yourself or, like to be destructive, stuff it down, turn it to bile. Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we need nowadays is more ways to express ourselves. And when you were talking a few minutes ago, I was thinking about how it's unfortunate how people get into these ways of thinking that it's like, this is the best. And I just explained how I did the same thing in the story with Abby. Like, this is the best way to do it. And therefore, other ways of doing this is invalid. Like, this is the best form of dancing. And therefore, all other forms are invalid. And it's like, I think that is a really important thing for us to look at and extricate from our culture as much as possible. Because if it's lighting people up, there's value.
I rail against that. This is the best. It can be the best for you. It can be the best for me. It can be the best for this purpose. But the key is why. Why we train ideally informs how we train, when we train, how often we train, what we right. That why question is so absolutely critical. And just because my why and your why aren't the same, which they're not, even if they're close, they're not the same because we're different. Our training is at least a little different, ideally because it reflects that why, and is part of why, with my own students, they're not all there for the exact same reason. So I try to make sure they all get something out of it, and I try to make sure that, as I come to know them better, oh, you're here for this, and you're here for that, and you're here for this, I can make some minor adjustments in real time to make sure, okay, you get a little bit more of this, and you get a little less of that, and make sure they go out the door, ideally, with that feeling. And I don't even know how to qualify that feeling, how to describe it, but the feeling. It's a feeling you had at dance. It's a feeling that we have at the end of a great training session where you leave and your heart's full and you enjoyed yourself and you got better and you connected with other people. And if you were to make a list of whatever the things are on your why, you checked off a ton of those boxes. Because that's what it's about for me.
Yeah. Here.
Right on, man. If people want to find you, website, socials, all that stuff, where do they go?
Yeah, you can find us at elements-mma.com. If you're interested, we didn't talk about it, but I also have a book that I put out.
Oh, that's right. Let's talk about the book, yeah.
Yeah, we can talk about the book, but that's at burnyourchair.com. That's a really big, that's like a big piece of my heart right there.
Let's take a few minutes and talk about that, because before we even started recording, you mentioned book, and I was like, well, we've got to talk about the book, because it's not often I get somebody in a chair who wrote a book. So tell me about your book.
Yeah. So the book's called Burn Your Chair, as we're sitting in chairs. But if the camera could tilt down, it would see
you're at least cross-legged.
Sitting cross-legged. So one thing that happened for me when I was getting really injured in martial arts training was I would have these knee surgeries, and then I started doing a yoga therapy training. Yoga therapy was like really like life-changing for me, and if I could, in a lot of ways, that would be all I was doing for a profession. But life took me in this direction, so I'm teaching martial arts, and I love it too. But I was doing this yoga therapy training, and of course the training is in a yoga studio, and so there's no chairs, right? And for a couple of the trainings, I had just had knee surgeries because of jiu-jitsu. And when I'm like rehabbing these knee injuries, and we're doing these classes in the yoga studio, it's like an 8-hour day, but instead of sitting in a chair and like just crushing my glutes all day, which, like fast forward, that's why I had tight hips, which messed up my knees. We were sitting on the ground. We would like have bolsters and blankets, and you would kneel and you would squat and you would, do like Sphinx pose and like shapes that when you sit in a chair, you never do. And I was like, there's something to this. And I had, here at Keene State, I had a professor who her whole research for her PhD was all about the sitting disease and how it's basically killing us that we sit so much. And I was like, oh, I've heard of this idea before. And then I heard this NPR special about these studies of indigenous people who basically don't have our pain and don't have our lifestyle-based diseases. And they're like, what's the difference? And one of the differences, so they found, of course, there's many differences, diet, how much they're outside, things like that. But a big one that the researchers pointed to is like, they don't sit all the time. And I noticed that the more I sat on the ground, it was like I was forced to stretch. Basically, I was forced to move. Like when you're sitting on the ground, you have so much more freedom.
And you fidget, right?
Yeah, you like change the shape of your legs. I only have like 2 shapes in the chair. Like I can put myself in cross-legged and that's it. But like on the ground, it's like you can kneel, you can squat, you can do 90-90 pose, you can have one leg out, one leg in, you can do straddle. Oh, sorry, everybody. Yeah, you're that, you're that mobile.
Right.
And I just noticed that like I decided to make it a thing for myself to not sit in chairs as often as possible. And then I thought, like, wouldn't it be a cool idea to write a book? And I had this idea. This was many years before the book was completed. I was like, oh, burn your chair. Just stop sitting in chairs. It's such a great idea. It makes you do yoga. And so when I was traveling for a little while, I wrote like the first chapter. And I was like, I'm never going to do anything with this. And then I tried sending it out to publishers, and it was hard to make the sale. And then I finally found a publisher, and they're like, we love this. And this was right when COVID was starting, so people were looking for lots of ideas. They're like, we love this, but we want 60,000 more words. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh. It totally changed the scope of the book, because my original idea was it was just going to be like a coffee table book, where you flip it open, and here's a couple ideas of things you could do rather than sitting in a chair. You can kneel, you could sit on the floor, whatever. And it totally expanded it for me. It ended up with 8 postures that I encourage people to replace the chair shape with as often as possible. And I found a ton of research about indigenous people and about children and how they move their bodies. And if you stick us to a chair, how much that changes our life. So I found a ton of corroborating evidence that was very validating for my idea and my method, because at first it was just me intuitively saying we should do this. And then like all this evidence pointed to the same. And it's been really a really important practice for me to not sit in chairs all the time. In our society, it's like it's everywhere. It's all pervasive. Like there's always the chair. You're waiting for the doctor, you're in a chair. You're going to the bathroom in the morning, you're in a chair. You're driving to the doctor in the morning, you're in a chair. It's like it's all chairs. And I don't think really that there's anything wrong with the chair shape per se. What's wrong is the fact that we're eliminating all of our other shapes for this one shape. So people tell me like I joked just now, like we're sitting in the chair, but this will be like 1 hour of chair sitting for me a day. I did maybe an hour. I'll do maybe an hour and a half of driving today. So that's like 2.5 hours of chair sitting I have to do. The rest of the day, I want to be on the floor or I want to be standing. Like if I'm at a desk, I'm at a standing desk because this shape is cooking one part of my body until it's burnt to a crisp, and that's kind of our lives. Like everything involves a little bit of pressure, like whether you choose standing desk or you, even if you sit on the floor to work, it's all creating pressures on our body. But my idea is that the body was designed to be kind of rotisserized throughout the day, moving through many different positions. And that's why they say, like, motion is lotion. Like the more you move, the healthier your body is. So that's the concept of the book. It's just the idea that like there are people out there that don't hurt as much as us, and here's one of the reasons. And it's just one, but it's a big one.
It's a big one. Yeah, most of our lives are going from one type of chair to another chair, and yeah, it's. I used to coach CrossFit. Spent about 10 years coaching CrossFit, and the number one thing I could do for my athletes to improve everything in their physical health was, I need you to hang out in a squat. And most of them couldn't get below 90 degrees, a chair, right? We are what we do repeatedly. So they would get to that position and they couldn't get lower. And I would work with them on getting lower and say, okay, when you're watching TV, when the commercials come on, I want you to get in this position. And it would take a lot of people 3 to 6 months, but they would come in, my ankles don't hurt, my knees don't hurt, my hips don't hurt, my back, whatever hurt often went away or at least got better. I'm not a doctor. Don't listen to me. But this simple action of using that full range of motion in that squat, all these other positions, moving around, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, when you talk about CrossFit, you make me think of Dr. Kelly Starrett.
I was going to ask you if you know about Kelly and the foundation he has for the kids with the standing desks.
Yes, and he just wrote a book. I forget the name of his new book. I read The Supple Leopard. I haven't read his new one, but I heard a podcast where he was being interviewed about it. And his first chapter is my book, basically.
Is it really?
And it was, and
that's quite validating from somebody like him.
Yeah, and actually, after I wrote the book, I told my neighbor about it. He's like, "Oh, you're talking about Nutritious Movement by Katie Bowman. It's like the same thing."
Yeah,
so there's been people writing about it.
Katie's a little extreme. If I remember correctly, she got rid of all of her furniture, including her bed.
Oh, dang.
Katie's intense.
We still have a couch. We sit on it once in a while. We've got some chairs at the house, but our dining room table is a table that someone gave us. It was like a regular table, and we had a friend who's a carpenter cut the legs in half so we can sit on the floor. And
nice.
That's wonderful. And when we have people who come to our home who are in poor health, they're the folks that can't sit on the floor. Like, oh, I can't get on the floor. I'm so, like, I just can't do that. So we have chairs for them. Mm-hmm. And the people who've been moving their bodies, like, oh yeah, no big deal. And they just sit on the floor like it's not a thing. And if you brought a lot of martial artists over to my house, most of them it'd be the same thing because they're making those shapes.
Give us a pillow, we'll kneel.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say is the last chapter I wrote in the book was called "Children are the World's Greatest Yoga Teachers," because I did all the research on indigenous people and people of traditional cultures and noticed that they all keep doing these shapes. But then I realized my daughter was born as I was writing the book.
Oh, cool.
And she was learning to walk as I was finishing it. And I'm like watching her. And because it's COVID and I'm a yoga teacher, I'm teaching yoga online all the time. She's seeing me do all these yoga postures. It's like she was walking by 9 months, which is pretty early. Yeah. And I started recognizing, oh, shoot, she's doing all the postures. So the last chapter is I have pictures of her that the artist turned into illustrations, but of her demonstrating literally every single posture that I recommended on the way to walking. So as babies, we start off where we can basically only be on our back safely, and then we start grabbing our feet. We start playing with the tension of our arms and legs, happy baby pose. And that's how we get a little bit stronger. We get a little bit more mobile, and then eventually we start rolling over on our belly. And we start like pushing ourselves up, Sphinx pose, which is like so. The postures that I offer in the book are lying on the ground, and then the next one. I'll go through the order of how a child would do it. The next one in our development is Sphinx or Cobra. We're like lying on our belly. And we're like, I want to get off the ground, but all I can do is move my arms. So they start like pushing themselves up. I have pictures of her doing like Superman poses and stuff because she's just like playing around with her body. And then they start to push themselves back to kneeling and sitting postures. And kneeling and sitting is the gateway to like squatting. So they start squatting a little bit and they're like, oh, I kind of feel like I can sit up. But as they're kneeling, squatting, and sitting, they're developing like core strength for eventually being ambulatory. And then they start grabbing onto things. One of the other postures I put in there is hanging, which people might not think of as a yoga posture. But to me, it's a natural human shape that we don't do anymore. We used to climb and grab overhead all the time, and now we don't. And so she starts hanging onto things and cruising, which is where they're like walking but holding on to something. And she would do things like inverting her body, like doing like a downward facing dog, or like making her body go upside down. And then eventually she was walking. And that's all the postures. So my postures that I offer are lying on the ground, as opposed to just the bed. I don't tell people to get rid of their bed, but yes, not just the bed all the time. So lying on a hard, flat surface, Sphinx or Cobra or prone positions where you take the vector of your posture and you make it your shoulders instead of your hips, which it usually is. Sitting, kneeling, squatting, which are just obvious, like being on the ground shapes. Inverting, like making the body upside down. So our vestibular system and our brain are getting like a totally flipped perspective. And standing and walking. And she did all of those in her first 9 months of life.
That's so cool.
And I was just like, oh, she did all of it. So
how old is she now?
Validating. She's 4 now.
Does she seem physically advanced compared to her peers?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it was very apparent right away. Like one of her little friends that I put air quotes because they were too young. I don't know if they were necessarily friends. But we were in the same like birth group with this mom, and so same age. I mean, it's different because he's a boy, and I know girls develop a little faster than boys. But like, she's going through all these like really ergonomic shapes and movements, and like he didn't have good modeling, and he also didn't have good nutrition and stuff like that, and he's doing strange stuff like butt scooting like he's a sick dog, to move around. They're the same age. She's already walking. He's not even crawling yet. And again, I don't know how much of that is like boy to girl development stuff.
And some of it's individualized.
Yeah.
But
now at 4 years old, like her being able to do things like a somersault and a split, and like things that I try to teach the kids at the martial arts studio. I have like 14-year-olds who come in and they can't do a somersault, because they haven't really ever moved their bodies. So yeah, you can definitely tell that she's got a different kind of movement background.
But it's cool that you have that opportunity to translate that up to kids, and it's awesome that for whatever reason, whether it's the UFC or something else, it got them out of the chair.
Right.
That whatever their goal is, whatever their why is, they're there, and you get a chance to work with them and better their lives, and that's awesome.
Most of the kids are there because their parents told them. I would say probably at least 75%. It's it's the parents driving them in there, which is awesome that parents are doing that. We do get some kids that are there because they want that martial arts power, and those kids are really fun too. Yeah, they're all fun.
Awesome. I hope you check out Ari's book, website. Those of you who've been around for a while at the beginning of this episode, you might have been wondering, this is an interesting guest selection. Now you understand why. You get it. You get it. Check out whistlekick.com for all the things that we do, whistlekickmartialartsradio.com for the show notes. But I'll hand it back to you to close us up. What do you want to tell the audience? How do you want to end things today?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I want to reiterate, please go to our website if you're interested in martial arts. You're in the Southern New Hampshire area, elements-mma.com. If you're interested in my idea on the book, it's burnyourchair.com. Reach out to me if you have questions, ari@soulshineyoga.me. That's my email, ari@soulshineyoga.me. But the thing that I really want to close on is it feels like this is the synthesis of this conversation, is whatever lights you up, whether it's traditional Kempo karate, or it's Jiu-Jitsu or boxing, or it's yoga or dancing, whatever lights you up, whatever lights up your kids, whatever brings people joy, don't discourage that for any reason. Please encourage others to move and jive in the way that works for them. And let's get rid of the elitism, because we're all a family of human beings, and however people are making themselves happy, as long as it's not hurting someone else, I think that's really important, to let that joy thrive.
Very awesome.